this. Okay, there we go. All right, so I see people starting to join us. So as people are joining in, hello, Therese. Hello, Jeniffer. How are you both this evening?
Hey, Julie. How you doing?
Good. Jeniffer, good seeing you again.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be
honor.
another great conversation. I can't wait.
Absolutely.
Therese, it's so fun to host you. We loved your first book. And that's why I love doing these virtual events, is that we get to host people that may not make it all the way out to Warwick's in San Diego. So, so thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me to come. You know, I would have come in person, I think, but when we were making the tour plan, you know, people were still like, is it going to be a COVID nervous situation? Publishers don't want to send you across the country and then have nobody come out and see you. So
it's really, I have to say that there is a little bit of that going on. And so we have, it's hit or miss with people coming into the store for events. So we love this. And so I want to welcome Warwick's customers, but we're also welcoming Book Passage customers tonight too. So we're doing this in partnership with Book Passage, which is up in the San Francisco area with multiple locations. And we are located in La Jolla, San Diego, and Jeniffer is in San Diego. And Therese, you are calling in from
Raleigh, North Carolina.
There we go. So
we'll see. I got a couple of friends who are in Toronto in that area who say they're going to be joining. I'm not sure whether they're going to show up.
Okay, well, we'll see if they're in there. We'll see if they're going to, which reminds me to remind people. So in the chat, I'm going to be talking to everybody because Jeniffer and Therese are going to talk for about a half hour-ish. But if you have any questions, there's a little Q&A button you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and pop your questions into that button and I will bring those into their conversation at the end. So be patient with us. We'll get to your questions at the end of their conversation. I'm also going to tell you how to, so maybe your friends will be asking questions. Hello, Kathy Buchanan is here.
Oh, there you go. Yay.
Yay.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
So, and in that, in the chat, so the Q&A goes into the questions will go in that little Q&A button. In the chat, I'm going to put a little link in there on how to order. Who's got a copy of the book? Do you have a copy, Jeniffer, to hold up?
Of course I do.
There you go. I love that cover. There it is. It all comes down to this. Really good cover. So, here we go. So I'm going to just start this off by introducing Jeniffer, who will introduce Therese, and then I will go away for the conversation. So Jeniffer Thompson, for those of you who come to us regularly know, but there's, I think, some new people here tonight. So, oops, I just dropped my paper. Sorry.
You haven't memorized my bio
kind of went away for a little bit. Jeniffer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and host of the Premise podcast. And this will also be on the Premise podcast in a few weeks too.
Terrific.
She is an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. And she does some wonderful jobs with some of our authors here in San Diego that appreciate her work. She and her husband, Chad, co-founded Monkey See Media in 2004 and have been creating award-winning book cover designs and author websites ever since. Jeniffer is a co-founder of the San Diego Writers Festival. She serves on the board of the San Diego Memoir Writers Association and is currently writing her own coming of age memoir, which we can't wait for. So you ladies have a great conversation and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Julie. Therese, this book is absolutely wonderful. I loved it. And I just raced through it. I did have to stop because it was late at night and I picked it up the next morning. But anyone who hasn't purchased and read this book, it's so good. I love it. So thank you for writing it, number one.
Oh gosh, thank you.
Yeah. So Therese N. Fowler is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author whose novels present intriguing people in difficult situations, many of those situations deriving from the pressures and expectations of their cultures as well as from their families, as is definitely the case in this book. Her books are available in every format and in multiple languages and are sold around the world. Z has been adapted for television by Amazon Studios, which was a fun movie. Did you like the movie?
Well, you know, I would have liked it better if we had been able to continue. You know, it was a 10 episode series that was supposed to go on for several seasons. And so, yes, I really liked what we got of it. I would have loved if things had worked out and we'd gotten more.
Was that because of COVID?
No, it was because Amazon Studios underwent a big transition in management, and they decided to get rid of some projects in order to acquire some bigger, I guess, more exciting to them projects. I don't know.
Oh.
They said yes to season 2, and then they changed their minds, and we all just said, well, that sucks.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I loved it. So that's just a little side note from Therese's bio, and back to it. Therese earned a BA in sociology and cultural anthropology and an MFA in creative writing, both from North Carolina State University. She has been a visiting professor and occasionally teaches fiction writing at conferences and workshops. A member of Phi Beta Kappa and PEN America, she is married to pardon me, award-winning professor and author John Kessel, and they reside in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where you're calling in from.
That's exactly right. All of the above, exactly right.
Awesome. How is the weather in Raleigh today?
It's getting hot now. It's been actually very much like California weather earlier in the week. And so I had my book launch on Tuesday, and it was low humidity, and the temperature did not get, much above, like, I was going to say early 80s, mid 80s, low 80s, and it felt wonderful. But now we're back to the humidity of the South. But I am very comfortable indoors here, air conditioned space.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
I'm from Illinois, on about 3 hours west of Chicago, a town called Milan, and part of what's called the Greater Quad Cities area. So some people have heard of Moline, or maybe they've heard of Davenport, and that's where I hail from. But I haven't lived there since, gosh, I was 19 years old.
Right. That was a long time ago for me.
More than 5 years.
More than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I've been in San Diego for 30 years. I moved here when I was 18, and I'm like, oh my God, I've been here longer than I lived there. So I can't really call it home anymore.
Yeah.
Do you still refer to Illinois as home?
No, I mean, well, the way you just described it is, but only in that purest sense. North Carolina has been home for me since 1995.
Your books tend to feature someone from the South. Have you always had kind of a romantic idea of the South, and including those characters and that culture in your books?
No, I don't think that is the case. I think it's just more of a happenstance. I did a podcast interview last week in which I was labeled as an adopted author of the South, which I think is really lovely. I'm never going to be a legitimate capital S Southern author, but I've lived here so long, and I do try to people my novels with Southern characters when it's appropriate. I mean, A Well-Behaved Woman did not really have much room for overtly Southern characters, but there is some little bit of history in connection with the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys that does take place in South Carolina. And actually the research that I did for A Well-Behaved Woman about that little piece of Whitney history, I'm not even sure that ended up in the book, but it was what I drew from when I was thinking about where C.J. Reynolds, the character in It All Comes Down to This, where did he grow up? So that's sort of like that little nugget.
That's
just
awesome.
Lived there in my brain, and
I wondered about that.
So nothing's wasted.
Yeah, right. It all comes into play at some point in time.
Yeah.
It all comes down to this. Where did this book idea come from? It's kind of a departure from your other books.
Yeah, apparently I'm just never going to be able to stay in one lane with my
I think
books.
that's great, by the way.
Thank goodness it's working. I did not design my career in this way to do these things and then do these things and then do this. I had been reading a lot of dysfunctional family kind of dramedies during the early part of the COVID shutdown days, and I wanted to, for my own next project, write something in that space. I felt like, for one thing, I had written, a tragic novel before this, and that took, that novel takes an emotional toll on the reader, and that novel coming out at the same time that the pandemic was really getting rolling here in the US, and happening at the time that the Black Lives Matter situations were really kind of blowing up in some of the cities. All of that put me in a space where I just needed to do something more upbeat. And so I wanted to write something fun, something, with something that was entertaining for me to write, and I hoped would be entertaining for the reader to read.
Yeah. Well, tell our readers about the story.
Sure. So this novel is, as I said, it's kind of my take on a dysfunctional family dramedy. It is primarily the story of these three sisters who were raised in Manhattan, lower middle class life. They're not Park Avenue kinds of girls, at least not when they're growing up. And it is about sort of the journey that each of them is sort of launched on after their mother dies, and in her will stipulates some things that she hopes will kind of direct them in their futures in a way that she wasn't really able to or willing to while she was living. And then it's also about the two men. I think we put on the advance copies, it's the two men that they can't live with or without, which is just kind of a fun shorthand for that. And it's a story about secrets, and it's a story about self-protection and self-identity. And we can kind of like get into the real nitty-gritty of the stuff if we wanted to do like a PhD dissertation on it, right? But so it's about a lot of things, but that is at least the primary story structure is as I described. And there's in the will, when their mother Marty Geller dies, she has this one little piece of property that she owns, which is what they call a camp or a cottage on Mount Desert Island, Maine. And rather than keep it in the family, she directs that it has to be sold and the proceeds divided evenly between the three sisters. And then trouble ensues.
Trouble does ensue. One of the things I loved about this book that I think is very timely for just where we are in humanity right now with everything that's happening in the world. And there's a lot of hurt. And this book, there's tension and there's secrets and it's dysfunctional, but there's so much tenderness in the tension, did you do that on purpose? Like, were you making sure that tenderness was there? Did it just happen?
No, I love that you got that from the book. That makes me very happy to hear. It was something that I absolutely wanted to be on the page in this story. And I will tell you, one of the things that inspired me in that direction was watching Schitt's Creek. Did you watch Schitt's Creek?
I watched a little of it. Yeah.
I just felt like, by the time I had spent, however many seasons with those characters, because I didn't find that show until, during the shutdown. And I just sort of thought, I want people to feel that way toward my characters. Oh, I'm just so happy to hear that you did.
Yeah, it was so nice to have, I cared about all of them. We didn't have like the wicked sister who was just awful. And I was sort of expecting that to happen. Like I kept kind of waiting for it, and it didn't. And I found myself rooting for all of them, and they really came together for each other. And that doesn't mean that everything was perfect, because it's dysfunctional for sure, but well done. I sort of describe them as one is well-behaved, one is trying to be well-behaved, and one just doesn't give a shit if she's well-behaved.
That's perfect. That's so perfect.
Which character did you enjoy of the three sisters?
Of the three sisters,
yeah.
Oh gosh, probably if you ask me on a different day, I might give you a different answer. But
that's a good answer too.
My favorite character to write of the sisters was Sophie, who is the youngest of the three. She just leaps off the page. Even I probably shouldn't say that, but even when I go back and I read from the book, I'm so entertained by Sophie.
I wondered about that. Yeah,
has a life of her own. I don't feel like I created her. I feel like I just took dictation for her.
Well, you did such a good job of creating this younger character who really lives in a different universe than her oldest sister, Beck. their worlds are so different with social media. And,
Yeah.
there's so many challenges that come with that, I think, for young people today. And you did well. Did you have some
Thanks.
help? Did
What, like understanding the world of the 30 something on social media?
Well, I guess she's older than I realized. She was
Yeah.
37. Yeah.
Well, yeah, at the end of the book, she's 37. Yeah, that's right.
But we go through her ages. You did a great job of just depicting this, this young woman trying to make it on social and be relevant.
Yeah, she's one of those. She would have been a person who was one of the early influencers, and so she's got her YouTube channel and she's got her Instagram and her Instagram stories and all of that. And she I think I describe her in the first the chapter, that when we first are introduced to her, that she's a fixer and she's a hustler. And it learning about that culture, I don't think I went and researched it specifically per se. It's just something that I observe, just as a user of social media, and I'm fascinated by. And so I loved that she would be the kind of character who ostensibly is succeeding in that space, but we learned very quickly that it's a complete facade, which it probably is for a lot of those people, frankly.
Have you considered writing what happens next with Sophie?
I actually have. My editor and I have discussed this as a possibility, but I haven't made a commitment to that yet.
I find myself wanting to know,
Okay.
I know what happens to the other two, but yeah, there's this part of me like, oh, what happens next? And I did see myself wanting the next book.
Cool. Very cool.
So there
I'll
you go.
tell
There's
Sarah
my
that you
vote.
said so.
Yeah. The themes in your book, in all of your works, I think, run true are, sort of this juxtaposition of, we've got the wealthy class and then, poverty or lower class, and sort of
Right.
how these two worlds play and like who we're trying to fit in. Talk about why this is important to you, because you seem to explore it in many of your books.
It's true. I am particularly class conscious, and I think it arises from the way that I was raised when I grew up in this little town, Milan, Illinois, on the sort of probably the very lowest possible rung of middle class, or perhaps the highest rung on the lower class ladder. And it's interesting to me when I think about when I was a child, how conscious I was of even the smallest differences between my material world and the way that I was perceived by the kids who were better off than me. I noticed, I lived on this cul-de-sac, and everyone who lived there would have been in a similar class financially, socially, but some of the houses were just a little bit bigger. They were just a little bit nicer. I was aware that the dad in that family had a management position at the company where my dad just worked on the assembly line. Like that kind of stuff, it was just built into me somehow. I think a little bit of envy, because who doesn't want, to be better, to do better, to have the cool stuff that the other kids have. And also just, maybe this is what also sort of angled me towards sociology when I finally went to college, was I'm just really interested in how humans divide themselves and use class as one of the ways that we do this.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why I loved the character of CJ Reynolds so well, because he's sort of got a toe in each pond, right?
He does, right.
And he does it well, and I think he has this inner conflict with who he is and who he really wants to be.
Right. No, I'll tell folks who are watching, CJ was raised kind of like he's a sort of a trust fund kid who has everything available to him. He's encouraged to work for his father's company, but he would really rather be a painter. And so this is a conflict for him that's happening not so much in the book, but rather as a part of his history that we will eventually learn a lot about in the story. So yeah, he is still in both worlds. And I'm interested in that. Obviously, if folks who have read A Well-Behaved Woman understand that, there's Alva Vanderbilt, who was so firmly part of that upper class world, but also so much interested in the plight of the people who were not like her and doing something about that.
So there was something you did in the book that I thought was maybe not on purpose, but really awesome. And maybe I thought it was clever. Deidre Callaghan at one point is talking about the school and how, they've been around a long time and they had been, involved in the women's suffrage movement.
Oh,
and
right.
I noticed how you sort of like her era would have been in A Well-Behaved Woman, right? That's when she would have been.
She would have been like a very young woman at that time. Sure. Yeah. Right. I guess my agent was just talking with me about this recently. She said that there are Easter egg kinds of things. My books sort of talk to each other in that way, which is not really deliberate. I mean, I am one person writing all of these different things. So of course there's all of this stuff, cross-pollination, I guess we could call it.
Yeah.
But what an astute observation. I think you and I should just go on the road together, and you should always be the person like pointing these things out to the reading audience. You're so good.
I'm there. Well, let's do it. Let's talk about your writing process. I'm curious, like, what does a writing day look like for you? Do you write every day? Do you write at the same desk? Like, tell us about it.
When I am writing, which I should be doing more of and haven't been doing enough of lately, I treat it very much like you treat your job. You get up and sit down and do the work. I am not an early morning writer, probably because I don't have to be. I'm fortunate enough to get to do this job as a full-time gig. And so I stay up late at night, not writing. I get up late-ish in the morning and I get around to, putting words on the page. But because I work and I'm more of a word count guide rather than, how many hours I'm sitting at the computer, that keeps me on task. So I might, if I have a looming deadline, it might be, try to get 2,000 really great words on the page in a day. 2,000 words a day.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like very much. I went on a writing retreat some years ago with a friend.
Seems like a lot to me.
Oh, this one woman who was at the retreat, and I'm not going to name check her just because I don't want her to think this is a criticism, because it's not. I'm amazed that she could end the day with like 10,000 words on the page, and the rest of us were just like,
what?
What?
Are they good words?
She said,
or just
no,
words?
she said it was just, it was chaos that she would then be able to shape into something later. But I was like, still.
That sounds exhausting.
I don't know what, did she just dump her brain out
Yeah.
the
Well, so, I mean, are you the kind of reader that you reread and you rewrite and you get it perfect?
Yes.
So that's why.
I think it's like a rolling revision, right? So put the words on the page.
Yeah, does it feel right?
And then when I start up again after a break or the next day, go back to what I wrote, make it perfect, right? But of course it never is perfect. I'm sure that in the finished book here there are mistakes still, but exactly as you described, kind of a rolling revision, so that by the time I get to the end of the draft, it's pretty close to what its final form is going to be.
I write the same way.
Okay.
I cannot move on until I know it's right and it feels right.
We're like perfectionists, right? Are you a perfectionist? Maybe just a little bit?
A little bit. So I wanted to ask, what came first, the beginning or the end of the book? Did you know
the beginning?
Okay.
The beginning, absolutely. And this almost never happens to me, but this book, there are five primary points of view characters, right? And I had 4 of them pretty solidly on the page, the way that they were going to be right from the first draft to the last draft. And one character whose storyline we just really, first draft sort of it worked, but then I went through editorial with Sarah, and she's like, I'm not sure that this is the right path for this character. Oh, there was so much noise in that just one storyline, and getting that right. And because that one wasn't right, the ending was something that I did not know. exactly what it was going to be.
Oh.
And I have never written a novel that way, where I don't know exactly where I'm going with the ending. It sounds like complete chaos, because how can the other characters' storylines work
Yeah.
and this one not? And I don't want to, spoil anything for folks who haven't read the book yet, but because you read it, that there's a kind of a little meta shift at the very end.
Mhm.
And that was something that was basically last draft, like, oh, that would be so
Interesting.
cool if I did that.
Yeah,
And
I was very curious. And as I was reading it, I was like, damn it, I want to talk about this, but we can't give it away. We want people
we
to
shouldn't
read
give
the
it away.
book. No, we can't talk about it. Not here.
That's right.
But the ending is just so beautiful. Like,
Oh,
it's
thanks.
like what we need right now, I enjoyed
Which is
it very
exactly
much.
what I want. Now, I occasionally do dip in to Goodreads to see what folks are saying about my books. And I'm
Oh,
really interested in the few readers who felt like, oh my gosh, the ending is just sort of too happy. It's
yeah, yeah.
I thought, well, then go read my last book, okay?
Go read my
If you
last
want
book.
tragedy at the end, read that one. I needed a happy ending. I wanted an absolute happily ever after ending, at least for some of the characters. And so, dang it,
Yeah.
that's what I wrote.
And I feel like that's what we need right now. I feel like it was perfect. I mean, in my 20s, I would be angry about those happy endings, like, oh, how easy was that? Like you didn't even try. Like, that's not life. But there's too much sadness in the world right now, and there's too many people
There is.
struggling. And I think we needed to have that. I personally needed it. So
Well,
say
I sure
thank you.
did. My literary agent told me when she finished reading it, she said, that is the most satisfying ending of anything I've read in ages.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
take that, readers who didn't want it all wrapped up in a nice bow at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. No, know that this is going to leave you feeling very satisfied and happy. And how much of you is in this book?
Every character, I would say almost down to, the cabbie that's in the first chapter with Marty, has just a little piece of me. So
Yeah.
like the cabbie, he talks about Marty is the mother, and she's in a cab going home from the medical clinic to her apartment, and she's advising this cabbie to pay attention to the world around him. And she wonders, does he love being in New York because he's an immigrant? And he says he loves Shake Shack. And I was like, this is me, actually.
love
Like,
Shake
I go to
Shack.
New York, I love Shake Shack. But every one of these characters has a piece of me. So Beck, who is our oldest sister, is the writer, right? But she's the oldest sister, and I'm the youngest in my family. So that dynamic is foreign to me. Sophie, being the youngest, has that looking up at her older siblings dynamic that is so familiar to my life. And Sophie, we're in her point of view, and we're learning about her, and we are told that she tries so hard to be the best possible Sophie. And that was me as a kid, trying to be the best possible Therese, so that my brothers would respect and admire me, so that my parents would think I was as good as they were. So, that's sort of how I get into her head. And Claire has some of my history, because I did live in Duluth. I did hate like hell how cold it is there. And my other self would probably be in medicine if I hadn't succeeded in writing. I'm fascinated by all kinds of science, but medicine is the kind of thing where, like, that's the job I almost did. And then I wrote a bad draft of my very first, now still unpublished, always unpublished novel. And if I had not gotten enough encouragement with that, I would have gone to become a PA, which was, or maybe an anesthesiologist. I don't know.
In charge of the drugs.
They say that that's a great job in medicine, because you don't have to deal with the patients. So maybe I was not attracted to that for that reason.
Yeah.
I was attracted to it because I had regular hours and I had little kids. So.
Well, I was going to say, a friend of mine is an anesthesiologist, and he says, we get to go in, do our job, and it's precise, it's precision,
Right.
and I can see where that would be almost give you a little bit of a high. Boy, that's the terrible choice of words. But the idea that like your job is so important and the precision is so important, and then you get to leave.
Yeah.
You
Right.
get to leave and let them do their job. And I think he really appreciates that part of it. So I understand exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
New York. It's a little bit of a love letter to New York. Have you lived in New York?
Never lived there. I
Really?
love it, but I do love it. It is a love
Yeah.
letter to New York. Yeah. I've spent a lot
Yeah.
of time there.
Yeah.
Z has a lot of New York in it,
Mhm.
right? New York in the 1920s. And A Well-Behaved Woman is very much set in New York. So
Mhm.
I, from the time that I can remember, was very attracted to New York City in this great romantic way. So many novels and so many TV shows and movies have New York settings. So I think I was just in the New York culture.
Yeah.
Surprising, right? Because a lot of young girls are attracted to Los Angeles. And it did have some attraction to me, but New York somehow had a little more. I don't know why. I didn't go there until I was in my 30s, I think, the first time I was there. But
Same.
yeah.
Same. Yeah, I really enjoyed that piece of it. And I tried to imagine, you writing those scenes and being very specific and taking this into those places in New York. And I appreciated how accurate. I really felt like I was in New York.
Oh, I'm glad to know that. And of course, the whole thing, the whole draft every time was going through what I'm saying, being assessed by actual New Yorkers, right? So if I wasn't
Yeah.
getting something right,
They will
I
let you know.
definitely had, yeah.
I want to talk about your first two books. And I heard that you once said that you thought about giving up writing altogether.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what made you decide to not give it up?
Well, yeah. So people who don't know my whole writing history, a lot of people think that I started writing when I wrote Z, the novel about Zelda Fitzgerald. But in fact, I had actually three
Three
novels
books.
before
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that were published with Ballantine Books. And I think that they're all pretty good books. I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. I was writing women's fiction, and as often happens in a writer's career, too often, frankly, there's a lot of publisher support for the book that they first acquire, right? And then if the next book doesn't do as well, and then maybe the next book doesn't do even as well as that, you find yourself in a place where either you have to, well, I think my editor at the time, one of her suggestions for how to go forward was not to necessarily write different kinds of books, but to like change my name on the books and maybe have the books published in paperback first instead of hardback, and kind of, start someplace different. But I found that to be a really discouraging bit of advice, frankly. I thought, well, if I don't do something different, how can I expect to get a different result? And so that was the point where I had to decide whether this was a career that I could have at all. And there are still times, frankly, when things are not going as well as I hope they will for one reason or another, where I will, it's usually a joke when I say, that I think I'm going to retire now and get a job. There's a Kohl's department store not very far from my house, right? I just go in there and, do a job that is almost impossible to do poorly, and then just, get paid and come home. Because gosh, wouldn't that be easier? Then I would never have to go on Goodreads and find, that somebody
people don't
just
like your
really hate this book and they wasted their time on it. And gosh, they couldn't even finish it. It was so bad.
How do you deal with that kind of rejection? I mean, it's hard to not. What is your process in that? Besides
It is.
ignoring them.
I think I got beat up by my brothers sufficiently when I was young that I was like, I can take it, What's that? The Chumbawamba song, right? I get knocked down, but I get up again. It's
I get knocked down, right?
That's it. That's it. Yes, very good. That's basically me, like just built that way. So the
Nice.
knocks are hard. Rejection is hard. Bad reviews are hard, but there's enough of the good, I think, to offset all of that. And I know I love the work. I just love what I do. I would hate to not do this.
I think authors are all sort of tortured in their own right, because it's very solitary. And there's days where it's amazing, everything is going great, and days where like I'm terrible at this. What am I doing? Why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah, I have a lot of that. I call it I totally suckitis, where you've got you something that you thought was brilliant when you wrote it, you read it the next day and you're like, oh no, this is so, no one will ever want to read this. What am I doing? I'm a hack. Yeah, we go through a lot of that.
And Beck suffers from that in the book. And it was so gratifying to read about this author in your book who's suffering from, the same things that I think all of us suffer from as authors. And so I thought of you and I thought, does she really? Like, how is it possible? You're such a brilliant writer.
Oh my gosh.
And, how much of Beck's experience, is taken from your personal experience.
Well, of course, there's a scene in which she's thinking about how if and when she ever succeeds as a novelist, because she's succeeding reasonably well as a journalist, but writing novels is her secret wish. She imagines what it would be like to be the author at the bookstore and have the audience there, to listen. And that was me for a long time when I was an aspiring author. I went to as many readings as I had access to, and then just sat in the audience raptly, as though the author who was speaking could somehow like sprinkle fairy dust on me and make it so that I could do what they were doing. And it worked. If anybody who's watching this is an aspiring writer, that's really all you have to do. It's good that you're on this Zoom, and you should go to every reading that you could possibly attend.
Why do you think that is?
Why? Well, I think it's because we need to understand that it can happen, right?
You didn't start out famous,
right?
An amazing author, right? Yeah.
All of us, go through the rejection. All of us have struggles in our careers, whether it's with poor sales or poor reviews. Everybody is having a tough time sometimes.
Yeah.
But that I would tell people when I teach fiction writing, I will often say, but there's always still room for another good book. Always.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true. I recently sat in on a talk, and she talked about how her MFA was a waste of time. At the time, I was thinking, I'll never be a writer. I have to get my MFA to be legitimate. And so I think she was placed in my universe. So I didn't think I had to go back to school to get my MFA.
Oh, good.
What about you? I mean, do you think your MFA really helped you, shape who you are as a writer, or did it hinder finding your voice?
No, for me, the MFA was, it made the path between aspiring and capable a lot shorter.
Nice.
I was able to immerse myself in the craft of writing fiction. And I'll tell you what actually made the MFA most valuable for me. It wasn't what is true for some people, like, connections to, agents and editors and that kind of thing, which maybe if you go to Iowa or some of the super highly touted programs, you might still get something like that. But no, it was the fact that I had to learn to evaluate my classmates' work, and the skills that I had to develop for that were the skills that I then was able to use to, make my own writing better. Yeah. So it wasn't that I was taught things, it's that I learned these things, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah, so you can do that, without going to an MFA program. You can do it in a great writers group, for example. But it just was really useful for me. And because I did not come in with a background in English or in literature, it was like this complete immersion into what books are, what stories are. I knew I wanted to write. I didn't really know how to write a story.
Yeah, but sociology and cultural anthropology is in and of itself storytelling, right? Or at least digging into
Yes,
stories. So they
it
really,
is.
it makes sense that the themes of your books are what they are.
They go together.
Yeah. Well, I am a huge fan. Thank you very much for this
Thank
time.
you.
I think we'll invite Julie back in to join us. Everyone, buy this book. It is a wonderful, wonderful book. Thank you.
It is, and Therese is such a great writer. And
To me,
She's a
I
great writer.
she's embarrassing me.
Well, that's our job. That's
gotta
what,
need
that's
the
our job.
well, exactly. And my thing too is that it's like for some you when you all were talking about the bad reviews and things, then I just find that just like the people take the time to do that is one thing. But the bad reviews seem to like stick with you more than the good ones. Like you can have 100 great reviews, but it's those 2 that are bad that just like gnaw at you.
That is
Yeah.
absolutely true. I don't know what it is about the human brain, but
Mhm.
the bad stuff is sticky,
Right.
and the good stuff just like goes through you as if you were a sieve.
Yeah, and
That's
because I
with
think it's
food,
part of
too.
I think part of it is that we don't like to accept praise. You know, there's something about
True.
that where we just are like, when somebody says, "Oh, you look great today," it's like, "Oh no," you know, it's like compliments are hard to take, but the criticism we seem to like, "Oh yeah, I
We
didn't do
believe
very
it.
good at that." Yeah,
We
yeah,
believe it.
it's a very interesting. So we do
My-
have some questions that came in.
Okay.
So I'm going to combine these 2 because Kathy and Amanda's questions are pretty similar. So the research included, well, I'm going to start with Amanda's first. Research included, how long did it take you to craft this story?
This novel, I think I started with the premise in like early fall of 2020 and probably had the final like going into production version of the book in April or May of last year. So was that September, October, November, 8-9 months, I think, for this one.
Okay. And then they're both of them, Kathy and Amanda, were asking, so what was the toughest or hardest part you encountered when writing this particular story?
Well, as I was saying, there was one character's storyline and that I was just having the toughest time getting correct. And also, when I first envisioned this story, I had a conversation with someone on my team who said, okay, the mother's got to have a secret. We got to think about what the mother's secret is. And that was kind of what I was building the story around to start with. I had characters in mind, I had some situations in mind, but I didn't really know, like, if it's going to be a story about secrets, what is her secret, kind of a thing. And the secret that I came up with is not the secret that is in this book, but I wrote a lot about that, and it had a whole backstory, a historical component with other characters. So creating that and then excising that from the draft was probably the most challenging part of the writing process.
Right. And then Kathy wants to know what would the easiest was.
Writing Sophie was the easiest part. Well, writing Sophie, and you'll see when you read it, Kathy, there's a little boy, a character named Arlo, who is absolutely a scene stealer. Everywhere he shows up in the book, he threatens to steal the show. And that was just, I don't know, like this just bit of pure love and joy for me to write him.
It came through. And then so Amanda wants to know of this is kind of a tough question because it's one of those things like picking a favorite child. What's your favorite book that you wrote?
Oh, and it's a hard question.
Oh man. That's hard because favorite can mean so many different things. I think, well, okay, I can't, I'm going to name 2 children of my many. Z is my favorite in a way, because Z, the whole situation of writing that book, what happened with that book, the experiences that arose from my having written that book, was life-changing. Okay. And Zelda as a person, I mean, I just feel like we have some kind of weird cosmic connection. But I think it all comes down to this, is the book that I most likely, if I weren't the author of it and I went into the bookstore looking for, you know, a great summer read, like I would buy this book. This is very much, you know, in my reading lane. And you would think like some authors, that's all they ever write is what is,
Isn't it? Yeah.
but that isn't always the case for me. And
That's
so
really interesting. That's
Yeah.
super interesting.
It is.
Okay, we're going to end on this one because I love this one, but this is a hard one
Okay.
too. Susan wants to know, if you were having a dinner party, what 4 writers, living or dead, would you invite? I always love that question, but it's a
Okay.
hard one.
4 writers, living or dead. All right. Well, for absolutely Zelda Fitzgerald is going to be there. Edith Wharton is going to be there.
Mhm.
I think Anne Patchett probably,
Yeah.
and a 4th. Oh my,
Can I guess?
throw somebody out there.
Jane Austen.
Jane Austen would be so amazing.
That would be a
was-
great dinner table.
Yeah, no, I'll go with Jane Austen. I'll take Jane Austen for 200.
Yeah. Alex.
Yeah, and I have to say, I really loved that. I think it was Publishers Weekly who referred to this book as Austen-esque.
Totally.
I just like, I wanted to get that tattooed on me somewhere, like Austen-esque. Where can I put that? You know,
I love it.
That's a great
That's
idea. Across your back.
It's not a bad thing to be part of that lexicon there.
I will take it.
Yeah. Therese, it's been wonderful spending this time with you. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
It all
Thank
comes down to
Jennifer.
this. Thank you,
Thank
Jennifer, as
you.
always.
Yeah.
Another great conversation.
So
So
much
it all comes
fun.
down to this. Can't wait till everybody gets their hands on this. So thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Have
Take
a good
care.
night,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.